Campbell has a tendency to give things long, elaborate names like Apotheosis, the meeting with the goddess, the woman as the Temptress, Atonement with the Father, the ultimate Boon in this case. Hello and welcome back to my Hero's Journey videos. So in the previous two videos, we've talked about the ordinary world, the call to adventure, and the road of trials, and now we've arrived at the Ordeal. The Ordeal is the name that Christopher Volger gives it in The Writer's Journey. In The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Campbell, it's actually a series of related stages that make up what Volger describes as the Ordeal. So we're going to look at each of those stages individually. Now, I will say that as far as I can tell, the stages of the Ordeal do not all apply to all works, even all works that follow the hero's journey. So I'll be using examples from the same 5 stories that I've been doing: Star Wars, The Lord of the Rings, The Hunger Games, Harry Potter, and The Wizard of Oz, but I won't necessarily be able to give examples of all of these stages from every single one of them. To get started, one of the stages that Campbell describes is the meeting with the goddess. Now, the goddess doesn't have to be a literal goddess. In fact, Campbell says that the goddess is incarnate in every woman. And he also says that if the main character is a girl, then the goddess character, instead of being a woman, will be a man. So it'll be gender flipped. They'll be the opposite gender of the main character. I don't see this stage in The Wizard of Oz. I don't see it in Harry Potter. I do see it in Star Wars with Princess Leia, and I wonder if Galadriel from Lord of the Rings kind of serves a similar role. She doesn't show up during the Ordeal, but she is a powerful woman who, given what elves are like in Lord of the Rings, she almost is like a goddess. I also think that Arwen, who is incidentally also an elf woman, serves a similar role in Aragorn's story, but not in Frodo's. There's also the woman as the Temptress. Now, the woman as the Temptress is not a literal woman. It can sometimes be a woman, in the same way that the goddess can sometimes be a goddess. Like, for instance, Athena in the Odyssey very much fulfills the role of the meeting with the goddess. The woman as the Temptress, it can just be any powerful temptation to the hero that makes him want to abandon his mission. So, for instance, in Star Wars, the lure of the dark side, the corrupting power of the dark side, and how Luke is tempted towards it. I know that's not so much a thing in A New Hope, where I've been pulling my examples from up until this point, but definitely in The Empire Strikes Back, and especially The Return of the Jedi. And then, likewise, in The Lord of the Rings, the One Ring would represent temptation there. The way that it corrupts, and the way that it's very difficult to get rid of it once you've been using it and carrying it around and whatnot. In the Harry Potter books, I do think that there's a little bit of a temptation, not so much in the first one, but in the last one, when they arrive at the Hog's Head and they're trying to get into Hogwarts, and Dumbledore's brother tells them, just go, get out of the country, live your life in hiding, and, live to see another day because you're on a suicide mission. I feel like that's kind of the give up your quest temptation moment. There's the Atonement with the Father, which is, again, it doesn't have to be a literal father. It can be a father figure, a powerful man, someone who has authority over the main character. But I think that the kind of obvious example of this would be actually a literal father. The dynamic between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader in Star Wars Return of the Jedi is very much Atonement with the Father. Obviously, that's not a thing in A New Hope, where it's not clear that Darth Vader is his father and their relationship is purely adversarial. But by The Return of the Jedi, that very much is a thing. I've been using Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone as the Harry Potter example in previous videos, but I think that Deathly Hallows works better for this one as well. I would say that Harry's encounter with Dumbledore after he dies but before he comes back is very much the Atonement with the Father stage. He's, facing this man who was kind of a father and mentor figure towards him, who he's learned a lot about in the past year, who he's questioned whether he can trust. I think that very much fits the Atonement with the Father stage. But then what all of them have is the Apotheosis stage, which is kind of the conflict of the story. Now, in The Writer's Journey, Christopher Volger says that the Ordeal is the crisis but not the climax, and that the climax actually happens much later on. So, for instance, in The Wizard of Oz, the example that he gives of the Ordeal is Dorothy facing off against the Wicked Witch of the West. But then the climax, he says, happens after she returns to the Emerald City, when she's figuring out about how the shoes can get her home. And he identifies that with one of the later stages in the hero's journey. Or for Star Wars, he says that their time on the Death Star, where they're rescuing Princess Leia and witnessing Obi-Wan's death, would be the ordeal of the story. But then the climax, obviously, is when Luke destroys the Death Star later on, which, again, comes later in the hero's journey. However, I will say that with some stories, I don't see a difference between the crisis and the climax, and it seems like the return journey and the return with elixir stage either get eliminated or get kind of smushed together with the ordeal. So like for instance in the Hunger Games, I think that the crisis and the climax of the Hunger Games are clearly both what happens at the cornucopia. I think you could argue that the ordeal is when they're facing off against Cato and the Mutts, and then the stage later on that comprises the climax of the story would actually be the thing with the poison berry. But they happen one right after the other. There's not a gap of time in between. Or the same thing with Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. The confrontation with Quirrell and Voldemort is obviously the ordeal. And it's also the climax of the story. And there's a little bit of a return journey in that Dumbledore comes to save Harry and he wakes up in the hospital wing. There's a little bit of a return with elixir moment where Gryffindor is awarded lots and lots of house points and wins the house cup. And then there's, crossing the threshold into the ordinary world when he is being sent back to the Dursleys. But the climax of the story happens at the same time as the ordeal rather than in the resurrection, return with elixir, whatever stage later on. I think that that's kind of a shift that we've seen in, some of these more recent stories where it's all kind of smushed together and then what happens after that is the falling action rather than the lead up to the climax. Now that brings me to the reward. That's what Volger calls it. Campbell has a tendency to give things long, elaborate names like the ultimate boon in this case, but it's the reward that they get for winning the ordeal, basically. So, for instance, it can be a literal object, like Dorothy gets the Wicked Witch of the West's broomstick, which she needs to bring back to the Emerald City. It can be more of an abstract kind of prize, like if you win the Hunger Games, yay, you get to live. It can be just a job well done. You got rid of the One Ring, it's destroyed, Sauron is defeated, and we can all live happily ever after. It can be a powerful object like the Sorcerer's Stone, for instance, although please note that Harry didn't actually want to use the stone, only to keep Voldemort from getting it. One thing that I've noticed is that often the reward isn't really the point. Like, it might be the thing that they went out on the quest for. We're gonna save Princess Leia, we're going to win the Hunger Games, we're going to destroy the ring. But in some cases, getting the reward doesn't solve their problems. Like, Dorothy gets the witch's broomstick, but it's kind of useless to her because the wizard actually can't get her back to Kansas. Harry stops Voldemort from getting the Sorcerer's Stone, but there's probably no way that he could have gotten it anyway because of the way that the mirror's set up. And also, Harry didn't want the stone for himself. He just wanted to keep Voldemort from getting it. Sometimes getting the reward isn't all that it's cracked up to be, basically, but there almost always is some form of reward at the end of the ordeal. And actually, I think it makes sense that that wouldn't be the be-all and end-all of the story, because the story's not over yet. We're actually only about halfway done with the hero's journey. I originally said that I was going to be making 7 of these videos, but actually it looks like it's going to be 5. There were some stages that I decided went better together rather than being separate videos and whatnot. So expect another 2 in this series, and then I'm thinking that at some point in the future I might look into doing a series of videos about the hero's journey character archetypes as well. So that probably won't be right away because I think I'm going to take a break from it for a while, but look for that maybe in March or April.